I'm sorry. Okay.
Great.
We are managing all the settings. Okay, many settings, yes. Okay. Well, good morning, good evening, and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Úrsula Bravo from Universidad del Desarrollo in Chile. On behalf of the Design Literacy International Network, I welcome Delane, Ingalls, Vanada, who has kindly accepted our invitation to deliver this talk number 28. Dr. Ingalls Vanada is an associate professor of arts education at the Catholic University of America in Washington, D.C. Her research focuses on learner-centered pedagogy, the psychology of creativity, and innovative methods for teaching preparation, including design thinking. The Design Literacy International Network aims to contribute to understanding how scientific design research informs contemporary design practices and design education from kindergarten to PhD. The overall goal of the knowledge exchange is to promote sustainable and socially ethical perspective amongst its international academics design research community. So welcome, Delane. Thank you for coming, and the screen is yours.
Just before we go, can I just say that we have a live interpretation, and that if you would like to hear the talk to be translated in Spanish, do please select an icon on your Zoom link, on your Zoom bar, which looks like a globe. It says interpretation, and then either select Spanish or select English, please. And the same for you, Delane, if you don't mind. So that what happens is when the interpretation is done, then from Spanish back to English, it means that you are able to hear the translation. Would you like to say that, Ursula, in Spanish also?
Yes,
so that people know what to do?
Yes, of course. Bueno, como es tradición, esta sesión está siendo traducida o interpretada del inglés al español o del español al inglés. Entonces, les pedimos que por favor seleccionen el canal correspondiente al idioma en el que quieren escuchar. Para ello deben hacer clic en el icono de globo que está en la parte baja de su pantalla en general y que dice interpretación o interpretation. Incluso las personas, Delane va a dar su charla en inglés, incluso las personas que no tienen problema, que pueden escuchar la charla en inglés, los animamos a seleccionar el canal del inglés para que puedan escuchar las preguntas en castellano. ¿Ya? Muchas gracias. So, the screen is yours, Delane.
Well, it's morning here in Washington, D.C., and I welcome you to this talk, to this chat. We'll consider it more like that this is a chat between us, and I welcome you and thank you for being here. My role right now is I'm Associate Professor of Art and Design Education at CUA in Washington, D.C., but I spent and I've been in higher education now for about 15 years, but I spent 16 years teaching pre-K through 12 in various kinds of schools. I probably have taught in every setting that exists. But before that, and overlapping with my life, I was trained as a designer, a fashion designer and illustrator. And when I started teaching, I always say that teaching kind of found me. I didn't intend to be a teacher. But when I had children, I fell in love all over again with the creative process and the developmental process. And people started asking me to teach. So it's just kind of snowballed, and I embraced it and overlapped it with my life as a designer and painter. But I realized that I taught differently. I realized that because I didn't have maybe initially a traditional trajectory into teaching, I realized that I was much more interested in students' thinking and in their cognitive processes, in the psychology of creativity, of developing creative thinking. and critical thinking. So I've always just kind of studied myself as well as and the way I taught, and it led me to research around how to develop a balance of creative thinking, critical thinking, and practical thinking. I think that as a designer, that's how I got there, because of being a designer. You have to be, yes, you have to be creative, you have to be a critical thinker, but you must also be very practical. And that kind of goes along with my life and my upbringing, I think, too, in my life. So I want to share with you today some of how I got to this method, a design thinking method that I use for training teachers. I use it in the classroom with students and study that as well. But I wanted to, and in the process of my dissertation, I developed this way of using this method so that it developed students' deeper thinking. And that was the goal in it all along. So I want to share with you what kind of this process and what it looks like, and a little more of what it's about. So I'm going to share my screen with you. You can go from the beginning, sorry. So I call it the think method. And I want to just walk you through it and talk to you a little bit about how I think that it has helped to develop and empower teachers to become more collaborative. When you talk to teachers about being designers, at first they really don't think that's true. But teachers are designing things all the time. So they are designing curriculum, environments, assessment, just the ways that children or adults, whoever you are working with, thinks. So I asked this question, what is education for? Through all of my teaching, I would say there's been this theme on, I really want people to think about how to think, not just what to think. It's not my job to tell them and just impart information. I want the thinking to come from them. So my goal is to advance this balance of thinking creatively, practically, and critically. And not just the skills, but we know that unless people have the dispositions to learn and use these skills, they really fall flat. So dispositions being mindsets, creative mindsets, practical mindsets, critical mindsets. And I'm operating from a theory of learner-centered pedagogy, learner-centered teaching that develops these three ways in particular. So learner-centered pedagogy is very inquiry-based, inquiry-driven, wanting to follow down a trail of understanding and making connections. So that connections is the next piece. It's very integrative kind of thinking. And then also developing a self-direction, not just being told what to do or being told how to think, but really wanting to be have agency and self-direction. My Zoom is locking up a little bit here. It must be a little low on Wi-Fi. So I'm going to stop the share and rejoin it. It's just a little weak for some reason, but I will continue here.
If you do experience any issues, I can share them from my end also, Delane, okay?
Okay, that maybe would be good.
Let me know.
Okay, I'm going to try this once again.
Okay.
There we go. It's waking up. So in the process of developing this theory, I came across what I call dynamic learning, and using these 3 pillars of learner-centered pedagogy: inquiry, connection making, and self-direction. I developed some ideas around what does this learner look like? What does someone who is a dynamic learner, how do they act? And so I pull apart these ideas and talk about inquiry as being creatively curious, not afraid to ask, following a trail of inquiry, the connection making being whatever you are studying or learning about, how are you connecting it to other ideas? And often that means managing some ambiguity, things that don't always just fit together exactly. And self-direction, being a risk taker, being resilient, having agency. So this think model that I'm going to show you, it also aligns with, you may be familiar, Bloom's taxonomy, a way of thinking about what are higher order ways of thinking. So we know that creativity is actually the highest, most complex way of thinking. And that's our goal. I think we're going backwards. I'm sorry. So this is the model, and in kind of a nutshell, these levels of thinking. And I developed a process for students to work through these various levels when they're solving issues and problems. And I have them start with some really sticky issues that they're interested in. So in teacher training, what I want them to do is follow this trail, follow this process, but also know that it isn't always just a perfect straight line. Things loop back and forth. And we talk a lot about how they have to learn to embrace the process. Even in teacher training programs, even in the higher education, students are afraid and they want to know what I want them to do. They want to know how to get it right, how to solve the problem. They want answers, but they have to find them themselves. So embracing that ambiguity and thinking of themselves as designers is one of the first problems and processes. And to empower them that they can be in charge of their own learning. And enacting is that final one of finding and solving world problems. As Eva says, problems that are worth solving. So these are some outcomes of this. I've really seen that in the process of their using design thinking to solve collaborative ways of thinking. They're maybe sometimes solving problems that have to do with education, but sometimes it's more about thinking of problems in our society or in the education system. So they activate these constructivist ways and think in interdisciplinary collaborative ways, and they're not always very used to doing that either. I've also used this method to teach graduate students online, and that was one of my challenges, how to do this in a way that students who are learning online can still collaborate, can still solve problems together. And what I learned is that, of course, they will find the platforms. There's so many out there, but they really embrace this. These are some students from the University of Florida which I worked with for their design research. And this is it's like a, I don't know, just a model that I developed so they can have something to write on, but then they turned this into more a digital means of doing this, interpreted it as as they saw fit. And in a second, I'm going to show you kind of some outcomes, some things that came out of this from different groups. I have them ask, how might we questions. This is a Padlet collaboration that they did. You can see that they're using sticky notes in a digital platform. This one was Stormboard, I believe. But they have used Google Hangout, Canva, Big Blue Button, Prezi, Padlet, as I mentioned. This is an outcome of a research around how to advocate for art education in the US. And they came up with, in the end, their idea was to come up with some very catchy social media campaigns and posters, and created a group that is still going today. It's called It's Never Just Art. They created some fun posters, and these were distributed in art education platforms. And then there's a lot more to add to this list, but you can see some of the titles of collaborative action design thinking projects. I think a lot of their thinking was how to advocate and how to change the mindsets around art and design education in this country, and in education, wanting more support for what we do as educators and artists. So yeah, these were some of the examples of what they investigated, developing how to develop students' process-oriented skills, how to be more learner-centered in community arts situations, design thinking in K through 12 art and design classrooms, building students' creative confidence, which is a big thing that comes out of using this design thinking process. Art educators as leaders and managers of arts integration, curriculum for arts integration, and one of the other ones was very interesting, an art gallery that displays focus on social justice teaching and projects. So some of the things that I've seen come out of this work and out of using this process is that just deeper agency among the students, an interest in social action, creative social action, both for themselves as teachers, but also how to empower students to do the same. Empathic inquiries, thinking more about human-centered ways of connecting to real-world problems. And then advancing collaborative research, which very often in graduate art and design preparation programs in the US anyway, it's very individual. Instead of working collaboratively on research, it's often much more singular. So I'm excited about what I've seen in that way. One of the things I wrote in the paper that presented for this project is predictable methods for problem solving will produce predictable results. We need to develop the capacities of our teachers in training at every level. So here's my contact info. And thank you. I'd love to hear your questions.
Thank you, Delane. If you don't mind, I might maybe kick off, and people can come in. Just briefly, these are master's level students, I assume.
Yes. And the last example. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and are they? And so they are being trained to become arts teachers, or they're already arts teachers upgrading the qualification?
Well, I've taught both. I think that the last ones, the graduate students, most of them are already teachers. They don't always teach in schools. Some of them are museums, some are community arts oriented, but most of them, yes, are teachers. So they've kind of followed this way of doing something for a long time. And so trying to think as more like a designer and more in a collaborative way was really different for them.
Okay, so based on that, then I mean, one of the things you're suggesting that is the importance of about linking, the way they deliver the classes then as a teachers, at in the schools, it relates somehow world problems. What are the issues? Because me reading, about what's happening at the moment in USA around education, and you're looking at the states like Florida and Texas, and there's lots of changes coming on board, right? And these changes are very much so they are recognizing education being have an influence and effect on the upcoming generation. But the idea is that affirmative actions should be not part of the education, essentially. That's my reading, for example, of the latest ruling, for example, of how students might get into universities, where the High Court in USA just have made a decision that affirmative action is against Constitution, is unconstitutional. And it might trickle down in terms of then what can be taught and how it can be taught. And there's lots of resistance, for example, about teaching students about gender or slavery and so on. I mean, this is not across the whole USA, but it's spreading. So my question is, as a context, my question is, how do you reconcile, these contentious topics and taking also the place where you teach, the university, which is a Catholic university, and then the issues that actually, in some ways, are dividing the nation, how the stands you have. It's a very, very difficult, I guess, issue.
Yeah, good question. Tough question, but not tough, because whether or not teachers can, in certain states, whether they say teachers can present certain information or not, does not mean that the issues don't still exist. They still exist. Students know they exist. Young students know they exist. So I think that, and the way I've always taught, is that you empower them to deal with and solve and think about and discuss and dialogue and use this process to bring out what they're interested in doing. It's not us telling them what they need to study. It's not coming from the teacher that they need to solve, they need to think a certain way or not. It's about empowering them to collaboratively look at issues that they think need to be solved. As a teacher, you take yourself out of that, you facilitate and you support and you help them learn better how to negotiate, collaborate, use design as a means of understanding something better. I think that's always been true. I don't think that we've developed an education system they still think that teachers impart information, that it's empty heads and you put this information into these empty heads. I don't believe that. I don't believe that's true. I hope I answered just a tiny bit of this question.
Yes, you have. Ursula, would you like to come in? You have a question, please.
I'm
Yeah,
sorry, I was
muted.
muted.
Yeah, there you go.
Sí, me gustaría, me parece muy interesante lo que propones y tu trayectoria, Delane, junto a los futuros profesores de arte y me gustaría entender un poco mejor cómo surge el modelo Think y de qué manera se relaciona con el Design Thinking y en qué medida también se diferencia, ¿verdad? Porque, ¿cuáles son los aspectos del Design Thinking que te parecen que están incorporados o incluidos en este modelo, pero también de qué manera se diferencia y por qué sería este modelo más adecuado, por ejemplo, para formar a profesores de artes?
Mhm. I think one of the ways, well, all of the, thank you, Ursula, for the question. One of the ways that it's used and is helpful in training teachers is, again, this idea of collaborative action research. It's not typically used to train teachers. So getting them to think in terms of, first, what are the sticky problems or the things that you want to solve, and think about that as research along with this design thinking process. So some of that is, I think, is natural to those of us who've used it so long, but that is why I kind of broke it down for them and helped them and continue to help them think about pulling apart problems, like thinking wide and learning to think about lots of various ideas and brainstorming, and then also then bringing it into make decisions and bringing things back together. That push and pull of thinking and getting to a solution is part of it. But what I've seen them do in this process is also dig deeper into who else is saying what and where else are we getting our information from, and thinking more connectively. And those are things that have come out of it. I hope that helps.
If that's the case, Delane, how do you assess then the learning? How do you assess students' learning? Because it sounds like, you know, there's lots of emphasis being put on the students to, you know, to have lots of freedom in terms of, you know, what they explore, how they explain, and so on. But that also comes, you know, with the difficulties of one knowing how to, you know, assessment. And if assessment is driving learning, and if it's all kind of, you know, take up whatever you want to take up, then it might lead to kind of like a, you know, quite a difficulties in terms of actually for students to know where to go. I know it's like a discovery journey, but it's about, I guess, how do you balance, you know, the you know, how do you negotiate the kind of like the leaving, you know, so much, you know, emphasis on the students, but also you, and how do you negotiate basically the power between, you know, how you actually assess them as a academic, how do you assess their learning?
One thing that's helped is having this process guide that steps them through each of the phases of this design thinking method. So they're documenting what they're doing as a group and as an individual. So it's not, and they have goals and guide deadlines to get them through this process, which is also, I wouldn't think it's necessary, but it is necessary. And then I'm always assessing their creative thinking, their critical thinking, their practical thinking. And so they, as they're going through this process, they're also looking at their own dispositions. Have they exercised thinking wide? Have they exercised being creatively confident? Have they exercised that they also are building empathy in this process? So pretty basic, but they also write it up. They all write up the research, they present it, they have to show that they have evidence of what they have done, but then they also present it, and that's a part of the assessment as well. You're muted.
Yes, thank you so much. Francesco, would you like to come in? Maybe that might be, yeah, thank you. Francesco?
You are muted, Francesco. I'm sorry.
Okay, now I think it's okay.
Perfect.
Okay, English or Spanish, the question, how you prefer?
English?
It's up to you.
Okay. Okay, no, first of all, thank you so much. No, I'll do it in English, my Italian English, that's why it sounds super sexy. First of all, the etymological use of the term think is very interesting. Thanks so much, Delane. And honestly, I have two questions, but I would like to only use only one question, because I just received this morning, the feedback from a conference paper that they refused my conference paper. Is a conference paper, ISDR, because the title is more or less similar, no? How to empower, how to coach future leader, using more or less some reference that also you are using. They refuse simply because there are no evidence in the proof that you can change the awareness of future creative leader, what you call future educator. That's why, more or less, I would like to ask to you, even if, for my personal point of view, in this moment of my life, I'm working more with philosophers, and that's why when we publish something with philosophers, they don't need evidence. They want to envision, they want to provoke. But when you publish to design discipline arena, they are asking to you, show me the proof. Show me the evidence, no? Try this kind of architectural background, no? That sometimes is useful, sometimes not. That's why the question is how you can prove the change of the awareness. And also in your slide, you talk about design new knowledge, no? Beautiful, no? Create new knowledge. How you can evidence that you are creating new knowledge? That is my question.
How can you evidence that you create new knowledge? There's a couple ways, I think. I think one, it comes from the students themselves and their own documentation and what they feel they have experienced. So it comes from experience. So personal experience being documented, not coming from me, coming from what they have realized the growth that they had. Growth is, you can say that. You can't say, okay, I went totally from point A to Z in this one project, but you can say, they can document themselves what they experienced. The other thing that I know to be true is that when you are doing art-based research, art and design research, and you are manipulating and you are working with materials and you are, I can't think the word, the materiality of creating leads people to ideas and things they hadn't thought of. The very act of making, along with researching, along with working with others, leads you to things that you hadn't thought of before. That's new knowledge. So I don't think it's rocket science, but maybe I'm not on the right wavelength with you.
I'm absolutely understand you, and I'm absolutely connected to you, because when you talk about manipulating new knowledge, it's related to times. You need times to show up the evidence. But when you are, for example, it's like seeding a plant. No, you are insert something, a provocation, a new knowledge, a new way, a collaborative way of thinking. But the evidence, in a design point of view, maybe we can see the evidence in the next generation, in the next 5 years, in the next 10 years. That's why I'm absolutely connected with your pedagogical approach. I'm in conflict with the design discipline sometimes because it's so beautiful, so creative, but sometimes it's too, for my personal point of view, connected to the idea of shaping the world, coming from architecture, coming maybe to produce something. When you produce new knowledge, it's something immaterial. No, it is material, but in a design point of view, immaterially. That's why I have nothing to say. Thanks so much. I would like to read more about your thing. Now I'm doing a research. I also just read the paper that you presented 2 months ago, and then you changed the speech today. I'm absolutely connected with what I'm talking in a different way, adaptive, but more or less it's the same. To empowering, you're also using negative knowledge, like power, manipulate, embracing, this kind of term that I really appreciate. Thanks so much. Thanks so much.
Thanks for being here.
Okay, I mean, yeah, sorry. Yeah, no, Francesco, that was a really important important question. There's a Manuela. She's got a question. Manuela, would you like to come in to ask that question, please? Hello?
Did she write something in the chat?
Yeah, she did. So it says, I'm a science teacher in Brazil, and I want to know, what is your opinion about how art design can connect with the science classes practices?
Oh, it's one of my favorite questions because I love the integration of art and science. And for me, lately, what's really working and powerful is using contemporary artists who are working in that realm of art and science. And Manuela, if you want me to send you some research that I've done on that with PowerPoints and researching different artists that are talking about wonderful, crazy ideas that have to do with both art and science. There's also an organization called A2RU here in the States, A2RU, and they their whole campaign is about integration of arts and other subjects, in particular science and in medicine. Lots of great work out there.
Yeah, so if you could maybe, share those resources, it'll be great. Yeah.
So Manuela, email me with your information and I will send that to you. Anybody who's interested.
Yeah, and before we wrap up,
sorry, Eric.
Would you mind maybe outlining in terms of like what is the teachers in the United States, what are the actually, how much freedom they have shaping the classes at the schools? Because at different countries they would have a different
Eric's freezing up, but I think you're asking like what are some of the freedoms that we have in terms of teaching, but I can only answer that question this way, and that is we have so many different types of schools. So public schools manage very different than private schools. And then we have public charter schools. And charter schools are often, and I worked in one for many years, so there's pluses and minuses there. They have more freedoms in a lot of ways, but they also have their own school board that often they may not be as knowledgeable about education as they could be. So that can be very interesting, where you can have perhaps more freedom in some ways, but also can be it can change a lot. The way you can teach can change a lot. Public schools, that's also going to be very different from state to state, area to area. We have very rural areas. We have very urban areas. Here in DC, half of the schools in DC are charter schools. Half of the schools are charter schools, half of the schools are public schools. So it's very different. No, I don't know of any other part of the country where it's like that. So I think it's very individual. Hard to give one answer to that. Sorry.
That's okay. Thank you. I just wanted to kind of understand, what is the scope for the teachers. Francesca, would you like to come in?
Simple question, if I may. Delane, because in your slide, you talk about agency, and the term agency is used by different kind of, from sociologists, from philosopher, for example, Bruno Latour, talk about agency in a point of view, Foucault in another point of view. The question is, in which term are you using the idea of agency, and which is the reference that you are using when you talk about agency? And the second simple question is not a provocation. In this moment, you are associated to a Catholic university. And through my understanding, sometimes the Catholic ecosystem try to evangelizate, the society in a positive point of view. Do you think that your research is also connected to the way that you are working in a Catholic university, or is absolutely disconnected to this Catholic evangelization approach? I don't know if you understand my question.
I do. First of all, I'm not Catholic, but I work at Catholic and I've been there 3 years. I've worked at a lot of other public higher education institutions, University of North Carolina, Charlotte, Rocky Mountain College of Art and Design, University of Florida, Boston University. Each of those is pretty different, but in higher education here, and the goal of CUA, Catholic University, is about truth and reason, and about critical pedagogy, and about developing thinkers, about social justice. It's a big campaign it's a big part of who the university is, wanting to forward social justice. Not saying that everything's perfect, but we also, as an art department, operate a little differently than perhaps some other, as an art and overall the arts, the Rome School of the Arts, we probably operate a little different thing than you might say the history department or the science department. Or so we, the fact that this art education program that I'm developing and have developed for master's students, a lot of that is about developing their agency to be social change agents.
Okay.
Very important part of this idea. So with that idea comes agency being having a voice, being aware of what the power structures are, having choice, passing that on to how they teach with their own students, whatever level that might be. Freire's work, the Brazilian philosopher who talks a lot about critical pedagogy, that is a big part of who we are.
Thank you for the question, Francesco. Yeah, because
Thank
it's
you.
important, because there's some people would actually argue that the things are said in such a way, that we only have a perceived agency. And if you actually read articles, and this is not just USA, but it's mostly around the world, they say, looking at the social movement, the most likely, if you are born in a specific social class, you stay in that social class. And if you are born in, working class, then you most likely stay in that working class. And there's a very little movement, of social movement within society. And this is very much so to do with how the structures are. It's not just about money. It's very much about the structures in society and the power structures, But it's a notion for another time. But it's about actually, the issues of, for example, having a private schooling. And so if you have can afford your kids to go to private schooling, then they have better possibility to go to, private universities, and they have better possibilities, to empower themselves, So there's, so it's the agency, it's I think quite
It's that's a really complex topic. It's a great one.
Exactly. But I would like to thank you, and I would like to thank to everybody who joined us today. I think we had a really good conversations, and we should try to kind of maybe unpick some of these concepts in the future.
Yeah.
About the agency, or about empowerment, about thinking what ways maybe the model you have shared with us today, it is different or similar to model that actually is proposed by the design thinking models by other scholars. And yeah, it would be good to kind of to discuss those as a separate kind of discussions. Again, thank you so much. And I just want to say that for next month, it's not next month. Next month we have it'll be in September. We'll have and I'm going to share the screen with you. Hold on. We'll have a Asa Ghassan, and he'll be has an interesting topic, and the topic is designing ways of speaking, and it's about and the subtitle is the dangers of design thinking. So it's about actually looking at and analyzing, and it's very much so what Francesco you have asked. What is the evidence? And Asa's research was looking at the articles. There's peer review articles in journals, and looking at what is the evidence the scholars have provided, for that design thinking actually does deliver, the outcomes they claim. And so I would like you to join us in September on Tuesday, 5th of September, because we'll have some of the discussion and presentation would actually, give us a maybe better understanding, how we might understand some of the issues that we've been discussing today. So again, thank you very much for joining us, and we're looking forward to seeing you in September. I think it'll be really good. Delane, if you can join us, and Francesco and everybody else, Maria and Francesca, because we can then continue this conversation with Asa's talk. And I would like to thank to Yasmin for the translating the talk today, and enjoy your rest of your day where you are. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Adiós,
everybody.
muchas gracias a todos.
Bye-bye.
Bye bye.